Bang, bang. What's going on, guys? Hope you guys are really excited about this interview. I really enjoyed it. I think you will as well. But before we get into that, make sure that you like this video so that more people on YouTube can find it. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. And don't forget that BlockFi is the sponsor today. They've got 3 products. You can buy and sell crypto on their crypto exchange. You can deposit crypto and earn up to 8.6% APY in an interest-bearing account, or you can deposit crypto and take out a US dollar loan against your crypto collateral. You can use the description right here, or you can go to blockfi.com/pomp to learn more. All right, let's get into this episode. I hope you guys enjoy this one. All right, guys, bang, bang. I've got Scott here with me. Thank you so much for coming back, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Let's just jump right into the topic of the day. NFTs seem to be absolutely taking the world by storm, but I want to talk about everything from the art investor seat. I think there's been a lot of conversation from the artists and how the artists can make more money and how great this is for artists. But obviously there's another side of the market in the art investor. And so let's maybe start at the top with just the macro argument for like why people should be looking at art in general, you know, whether it's physical art or digital art. What is your kind of thought process around that argument?
I mean, we tell investors to think about this asset class as it's one of the oldest asset classes. Sotheby's and Christie's have been around 250 years, but historically it's only been limited to the ultra wealthy. So a lot of these paintings sell for between $1 million and $100 million. So it really hasn't been that accessible. Masterworks is the first company to really securitize a painting, sell shares in a painting so people could actually invest in them. But if you look at the investment characteristics, I mean, contemporary art post-World War II has outperformed the S&P. It's an uncorrelated asset class, meaning that it's a great tool to diversify a portfolio. So we think art has a role in almost any investor's portfolio. Historically, it just hasn't been possible.
Yeah. And so when you start to dig in, let's start with the kind of traditional art market. You talked a little bit about the outperformance of the stock market. How does that market look, including the securitizations that you guys are doing today? Are there limitations by country, by kind of wealth status, accreditation? Just what does that look like at the moment?
I mean, most investment grade paintings are in excess of probably $1 million in purchase price, right? So qualitatively, the way to think about the art market on a global basis is it's really a market where you have ultra wealthy people living around the world trading $1 to $100 million paintings with each other, and that is the $60 billion a year that is the transaction volume in the art market now. So obviously, up until Masterworks, there really hasn't been a way to invest in these paintings. But we see that changing, and I know we're going to talk about NFTs, but I think that's another exciting part of the art market.
Yeah. And so today, through something like Masterworks, basically anyone with, $100, $25,000, whatever it is, they can come in and they can actually participate in these traditional pieces. And really your guys' goal is to not only get access up and kind of reduce friction, but also I know that you guys had this Banksy piece that you sold and there was a pretty nice return there. Just walk through maybe like that as an example as to how Masterworks itself works.
Yeah, so basically we go out, we buy a great painting. In that case, a Banksy painting. I think the title of that painting was Mona Lisa. We raise capital, so we sell shares to fund the purchase of that painting. And then after we sell the painting, which in that case was very fast, it was roughly I think 1 year later, we distribute proceeds to investors. So in that case, we sold the painting quickly. I think it was a 37% return net of fees. That was a great outcome for investors. You know, generally we tell people to think about investing in art as a long-term hold. 7 years, 10 years, really takes a while to generate returns. But we also have secondary markets for people not trading shares in great paintings. So that's an alternative for people that can't wait the full time.
For sure. And what are you seeing in the traditional art market around prices, given the macro environment, kind of all the quantitative easing? Are prices going up as more and more people look for store value assets?
I mean, it's a great question. So historically, we've always talked about art as an asset class as just an outperforming asset class. Like in general, again, for art created after World War II, it's outperformed the S&P by, I think, 150% from 1995 through 2020. So it's this really interesting asset class regardless. I think today we have a lot of people who are just saying, hey, governments around the world are printing money. We think inflation is going to happen. We're interested in real assets and we're interested in art specifically. So we're seeing a lot of interest. And we actually did we co-published a report with Citi, I think in December of 2020, where Citi analyzed the correlation between real interest rates and art prices. And not surprisingly, as interest rates go down, you see art prices go up. So it's a conversation that we have with investors every single day. There's tons of interest in art as an inflation hedge, for lack of a better term, right now.
I am not going to be surprised if you told me there was a big overlap between people who believe they're macroeconomists and art investors that are speculating. Let's talk about NFTs. Obviously, everyone seems to have woken up to this. Whether it was Beeple's kind of $69 million sale at Christie's, now there's this artist pact at Sotheby's, and then obviously all of the volume that's going through some of these other exchanges that are kind of digital native. What's your take on what's happening? What questions do you have? What concerns or what are you excited about?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we've gone through this whole process that everyone's gone through, which is like, what is going on, to kind of trying to rationalize it in our own head. When the Beeple thing first happened, to be totally transparent, I mean, I was having conversations with lots of friends where I thought it was just this price fixing thing, right? Like someone was pretending to buy this digital work of art for $70 million. Beeple is actually being paid $69.9 million in a back room to try to, create this market for digital art. But after talking to Christie's and the people that work there, it seems like that definitely wasn't the case. I think there were more than 30 bidders registered on that work. None of them were known to the auction house prior to the auction. It seemed, you saw the videos of him watching the sale. Like it definitely seems like that was a real transaction, and it seems like digital art and NFTs are here, at least for the short term. So we find it really interesting from a lot of different ways. Like one of the things that our investors ask us a lot is, hey, we're really interested in this blue chip segment of the market, which outperforms the S&P, has low loss rates. That's a great allocation for our portfolio. But how do we get access to stuff that's more speculative? And I think this is an interesting way for investors to speculate in the art market, which hasn't, frankly, been available before, right? Like there's never been a segment of the art market that you can make returns like you've seen with NFTs. I mean, I think that also comes with a lot of risk, and I don't know how to think about these prices and everything right now, but it's definitely the most speculative segment of the art market right now.
You talked a little bit about like the people who were registered for the Christie's auction. Almost all, if not all of them, were unknown to the auction house. And so do you look at this as basically, this isn't so much the art market, is evolving. This is literally just net growth to art in general, and this kind of digital natives, both the platforms, the artists, and the art investors?
Yeah, with one exception. So we do know, I mean, I know of two very well-known artists right now who I can't say their names, but they're working on NFTs. So there's artists themselves have clearly woken up to what's going on. I think collectors are still divided, right? Like the people that are investing in or buying NFTs are not the same people that are investing in or buying blue chip art. So I think those are two different universes. Maybe those Venn diagrams overlap at some point, but right now they're pretty distinct.
Yeah. And so when you start to look at this, I know that there's still kind of a moving target, right? Do these prices make sense? What are the use cases? But when you look at it, maybe what's like the rationalization you're telling yourself, right? So if I had to say, hey, be the NFT bull, how do you think about it? And what do you say to people who are skeptical?
Yeah, so I think this is a very hard question, and if we go back to basic fundamentals of how markets are created and how markets are sustained, all markets have to have some sort of framework in which they operate. I was actually having this conversation with our general counsel earlier, and the art market, there's a clear understanding between institutions and collectors around what's important, what's historically significant, which artists did what things first. And they sort of have these places in history, what we refer to as cultural significance. And there's a correlation between cultural significance and price. And many of these artists also are they're deceased or they've been painting for decades. And you have this long track record of representation between galleries and prices at auction, et cetera. So there's this entire framework of which you can establish price. I think for me, the question is with the Beeple sale in particular, it is what happened culturally significant. And I think you can argue that in different ways. And is that precedent for the artist and for future prices of the artist? We see this with lots of artists, right? There's tons of artists that we see in the art market all the time that go from very unknown artists to having, I wouldn't say a $70 million sale, but maybe a $1 million sale. And then everyone's asking, is this now a $1 million artist? So that's not uncommon. I just think the magnitude of the $70 million is what really shocked everyone.
And so in that kind of historical example where there is that $1 million sale and then people start asking, is this a $1 million artist? How do you normally think through that, right? Like, are there certain frameworks or data points that you look at to kind of determine, is this a kind of outlier sale, or has the artist actually, increased the value, if you will, of all their pieces?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So if you look at artists in the secondary market, and the secondary market is really, you think of the art market divided into two different segments: primary market, which is where artists are painting new paintings and selling them through galleries, and the money goes back to the artist; and the secondary market, where paintings are resold over time between multiple collectors. Generally in the secondary market, most of these artists have long track records. So you're analyzing similar paintings that have sold historically, how prices have increased over time. And with certain artists like Basquiat, for example, Basquiat's prices shockingly have gone up roughly 18% a year for almost 20 years, right? It's just this very predictable market that continues to increase. With artists that don't have that track record, usually what you're asking yourself is, how culturally significant is that artist? And I would say there's not a clear definition of cultural significance. Cultural significance to us means three different things. One, who is that artist exhibited with? Like, have they been associated with other great artists? Two, what institutions collect that artist? What museums collect that artist? And then three, how global is the demand for that artist? But it's hard to apply that definition of cultural significance to what we're seeing in the NFT space.
Yeah. If you had to make a guess as to how the cultural significance can be applied, like that filter, that perspective, where would you start with the NFTs? Is it just trying to figure out like who owns this artist, who's promoted them, what podcasts have they done? Like, just how would you try to figure that out?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's right. I mean, I think you would almost look at like Google Trend data, right? Like what's the share of voice for a particular artist in kind of the digital ecosystem? How is that share increasing or decreasing? The Beeple example is somewhat unique, and that's really almost the first very well-known example of an NFT sale, right? So that in itself kind of has cultural significance, or I think does have cultural significance. But yeah, I think since this art is digital and really all of the transactions are digital, you sort of have to redefine what is cultural significance.
Yeah, and it also feels like in the traditional world, a lot of the data points that you described in terms of where they've been exhibited, what institutions are collecting, that all seems to be very kind of analog world, right? Which would make sense for traditional art in kind of the analog world. Before we started, we were talking about what some folks are doing in the NFT space is they're trying to buy digital art, and then they're going to essentially display it in these digital worlds, these digital museums or whatever. And so while that is not prevalent today, if that does become prevalent, it's almost a digital recreation of a lot of the same kind of data points, if you will, right? In terms of the institutions or the digital museums that are collecting may become a signal as well.
Yeah, I think that's really fascinating. And we're thinking through the same things, right? Like, what are the use cases for NFTs? And you mentioned one, which is digital museums, which I hadn't heard of that one. I think that's super interesting. The other is just, how do you have devices actually display NFTs in homes so people can, outside of a laptop, kind of consume the art. The other thing that I've wondered a lot about is, how do artists' copyrights work with NFTs, or do they work with NFTs? I think that's really interesting, right? Like the idea that maybe anyone could consume an NFT if there is a fee. Is there some sort of like brokering or sale of a copyright of an NFT to a marketplace of buyers? I think that's really interesting as well. So it's super early days. I mean, we're interested in it. It's very hard to tell where it goes from here, but it does seem like it could be a new segment of the art market that people really haven't thought that much about.
And when you think about copyright, unpack that a little bit more in terms of how you think about copyrights in the legacy art market, and then what you're thinking about in this kind of digital art market.
Yeah, so many people don't realize this, but if we buy a painting at Masterworks, let's say we buy a $25 million Basquiat, we don't actually own the copyright to that painting. That's owned by the Artist Foundation. So independent of ownership, the copyright is something that's separate and distinct. So how copyrights have been licensed historically and how that whole industry works is pretty antiquated. Most people that own copyrights, they basically generate revenue they find people that are violating the copyrights, they hire an attorney to go after the person, they negotiate, they settle, and that's how they make money. It seems like to me there could be some interesting correlation between NFTs and copyrights here that could make more sense.
Yeah. And it almost feels like in some weird way, one of the reasons why artists are so excited about NFTs, it appears, is because they essentially can code into the tokens that they'll get a royalty stream, right? Kind of a 10 or 20% on each future sale of their piece. And so copyright may be kind of intertwined in that in some way. Maybe it's a little different than it is in the traditional market, but it's a way for them to at least monetize much better the secondary market than they have as a way today.
Yeah, I think that's right. The other thing that we've just been thinking a lot about relative to NFTs is this, and I guess it's almost theoretical, just this concept of scarcity. So we fundamentally know that in the art market, one of the things that drives returns is scarcity. And the example that I always like to use with people is Jackson Pollock. So, Pollock during his lifetime painted all these drip paintings, many of which are $100 million paintings today. But throughout history, after he died, all of those paintings were essentially donated to institutions, except for what I think are 21 paintings now. So out of those 21, there's only a couple left that are great paintings. Most are, I wouldn't say bad examples, but B or C examples. But the B or C examples are selling for $20 million, $30 million, $40 million, because if you want a Jackson Pollock drip painting, that's all that's left. So I do think what's happened here is digital art combined with blockchain has created this element of scarcity, which is really interesting. And historically, that's what's driven art prices as well.
Yeah. And I guess the big piece that people don't understand also about the traditional art market is kind of the appraisal process, or what I'll call the infrastructure around art. So most people think of a market as just there's the artist, there's the investor, the buyer, and that's pretty much it. Maybe just touch on a little bit, how you guys leverage some of that infrastructure, the appraisals, and then how, if any, thoughts around, how that translates into the digital art market.
Yeah, it's a good question. So the easiest way that I tell people to think about how artwork is valued is to think about real estate, which most people are familiar with. So if you buy a house, you generally get an appraisal before you get a mortgage on a house. So art is the exact same. You go to major appraisal firms that appraise paintings, and they appraise paintings because for most of these great artists, there's similar paintings that are selling reasonably frequently. I call it at least once a year. And they can kind of look at the trends and those prices of similar paintings over time and arrive at a value. With NFTs, I don't know how that works, right? Because you have such a short time period. There really isn't a history of comparables to value something. But the thing that is interesting, the thing that's most interesting to me about the Beeple sale was the number of bidders, right? Because you have two bidders on a painting that goes to $70 million. You can say, oh, there's two people that are crazy. Here you had 30 people, and 30 bidders on anything in the art world is unheard of, right? You don't have 30 bidders on a $25 million Basquiat, right? Like you might have 6 bidders if it's a really great example and there's a lot of demand for a painting, but you never have 30. So the depth of bidding for that work in general is super interesting and does indicate that there's real value there, at least at a minimum, to those 30 people.
Yeah. And when you think about that, I don't want to ask you to speculate too much, but just why do you think it brought so many more people than, kind of traditionally it would? Is it just, it's the first one, and so naturally people all want to kind of be a part of it, or is there some other reason?
I think it's the first mover dynamic. I guess that, so the optimist would say it's a first mover dynamic. The cynic would say whoever bought the work owns 100 other works by Beeple. And, he just marks the market for all of the other works that he owns. Could be both, who knows?
Yeah, I'm very, very interested to see what the Beeple pieces start to do in the secondary market now, given such a high price point, right? Do they actually materially move up or not? When you think about Masterworks and the business today, obviously there is a ton of interest that has kind of increased because of the macro environment and asset inflation, and the desire to use that store of value through art. Are you also seeing or feeling any kind of increase in just traditional art because of NFTs, like almost like a Streisand effect, where people are talking more and more about art in general, and so it's also bleeding into the traditional market?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, our membership team has hundreds of calls a day with investors who are interested in Masterworks, and I mean, almost all of those calls now are have some NFT question or comment. I think it's funny that, like, to me, it's amusing because, like, the person asking the question doesn't really know what they're talking about. The person on our membership team doesn't really know what they're talking about. So it's kind of like, the game of telephone that you play when you're a child, where, like, people just start saying things and it doesn't really mean anything in the end. But definitely it's generated a huge amount of interest in art and investing in art.
Yeah. And then we've talked a lot about traditional art. And I think for most of this, we've been kind of referring to physical paintings or other types of art. What about sculptures? You've got a great piece there kind of over your head. But how do you think that is affected? Is that a lot of the same things that you see with paintings, or any specific differences that are worth calling out?
So generally speaking, at least in a traditional art sense, the most investable segment of art from a medium perspective are paintings. If an artist is a sculptor, meaning if their main medium is sculpture, then generally sculpture appreciates similarly if they're an important artist. Like, this is an artist named John Chamberlain, who was the first artist sort of in mid-century America to reuse found objects in a sculptural form. But mostly we tell investors to think about paintings. Generally, drawings and prints don't appreciate at the same rate as paintings. And again, a lot of that just comes back to scarcity. You think about an artist like Picasso. I use this stat a lot, where a lot of people say, I own a Picasso, I have a Picasso. Picasso created 60,000 objects in his lifetime. There's a whole bunch of bad Picasso out there. There's a very narrow amount of good Picasso, which is super rare and continues to appreciate really rapidly. But there's a lot that's just not as important.
How do people determine what's good and bad in terms of Picasso, right? Because I think people who are unfamiliar with the art market would say, well, isn't it all Picasso, right? Like, if he's such a genius, then shouldn't it all be great? Is it the way it looks? Is it some other sort of hierarchical framework people have applied? Is it the appraisers? How does that get determined?
Yeah, for an artist like Picasso, it goes back to this cultural significance comment, right? Like, how is art history determined? What portion of his work is most impactful, most significant, and what is least impactful or least significant? And any artist has, they have true masterpieces. Picasso Guernica, for example, that he spent years painting the painting. That was one of his masterpieces that was recognized in his lifetime. So it really depends on the artist and the work, but usually they're really great masterworks. They were recognized in their lifetime as a masterwork. They spent years on them. Very different than like a napkin drawing that he might otherwise do.
That makes sense. What's been the most shocking thing you've seen in the NFTs so far? Right, because I know you're paying attention. I know you're trying to kind of figure it out alongside the rest of us, but just coming from the art world, like, what's been the most egregious, shocking thing?
Well, I think the most shocking thing is actually positive, right? Like, we were super skeptics in the very beginning of this. I mean, I was 100% convinced that the Christie sale was just fabricated. So the most shocking thing to me was to find out that it wasn't. So yeah, I mean, we're kind of coming full circle with NFTs, and I think a lot of these technologies, independent of art. I mean, I've been starting technology companies for 20 years, and my passion, before art, is really tech. And I think a lot of these technologies tend to kind of emerge, have a lot of hype, attract a lot of early adopters, die off for 5 or 10 years, then all of a sudden there's a resurgence, and there starts to become mainstream adoption. So I do think that could be the case here, right? Like, we could be in the ultra hype phase, which is bringing in a lot of early adopters. Startups will start, they'll raise money, they'll build products around NFTs, et cetera. And then 10 years from now or 15 years from now, you start to get mainstream adoption. But yeah, I mean, we've been surprised with this in general, I think.
For sure. And then talk to me a little bit about kind of what's been going on the Masterworks platform itself in terms of the traditional art. Have you seen specific pieces that people are really interested in, or anything that you guys have purchased recently that kind of stood out?
I mean, our business is just exploding. So last year we raised over $100 million. This year, we're on track to raise 300 or 400 million, maybe more. There is huge interest in general, I think, just because most investors have totally exited fixed income. They're sitting on a bunch of cash. They're concerned about inflation. They're interested in real assets generally. But what are real assets? I mean, I guess real assets are real estate. That's not that interesting from a return perspective, maybe collectibles. But within collectibles, art's kind of 90% of the market, right? Like art's a $60 billion a year market. So we're seeing real interest from very sophisticated investors coming into these vehicles, and we're buying a $1 to $25 million painting every week now, basically. But it has been very interesting to see allocators who historically are regarded as some of the smartest people in the alt space buying directly into these vehicles for their own funds or themselves.
So that's gonna be one of my questions, is how much of it's retail versus some of the institutional type investors? And it sounds like you guys have really kind of cracked into the institutional world, but also still have a lot of retail usage.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that today 95% is retail. I think by the end of this year, 70% will be retail, 60% will be retail. Like we're seeing managed money, broadly speaking, coming into these vehicles much faster than anticipated for all of those reasons.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the headline that says Masterworks, securitizes NFT with Steve Cohen's participation, right? So some sort of crazy headline of the whole art world coming together. What when you think through kind of demographic wise, are there certain things that you see on Masterworks? Is it more young people, older people, maybe geography wise, certain areas that people come from?
Yeah, I mean, we're a regulated business, so all of our offerings are filed with the SEC as public offerings. Our sales team is regulated by FINRA. Our marketing today is only within the U.S., so we're only marketing to U.S. investors. That doesn't mean that we don't support international investors. I think 15% of the investor base is international now, but we're not really reaching out to anyone outside of the U.S. So the demand today that we have is primarily from US. In terms of demographics, it's really all over the map. I mean, we have people investing from IRA accounts, so generally they're older. We have younger people investing in these vehicles too. We're now having a lot more people. Like when we started the business, we weren't really seeing people who self-identified with the art market who are collectors investing in the vehicles. We're starting to see that today. So there's really not any rhyme or reason to who's on the platform. We're kind of attracting everyone at this point.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then last question for you is on the NFT side. Is there anything that you've seen outside of Beeple that's really kind of caught your attention and you're spending a lot of time on, whether it's an artist, a specific type of sale or drop or anything?
I mean, I can't unfortunately talk about any of them because they're with a couple of well-known artists who want to keep it quiet. But I mean, most of the activity that we're getting are from artists that we sell on the platform or artists who we're friendly with that are interested in NFTs. They're not sure what to do. I mean, they see an artist, selling a digital work for $70 million. They think, that could be me. So we're trying to, I guess, advise or potentially partner with those artists to help them kind of navigate the NFT space.
Figure it out. That makes a lot of sense. Have you bought any NFTs? Do you want to buy any NFTs?
I'm not smart enough to buy NFTs.
Don't worry. You, me, and everybody else. I feel like the one that gets me is NBA Top Shot, right? It's like the art. Okay, like it's a digital version of the art market, but owning the LeBron layup from the random game on Wednesday night in the third quarter, that's the one I probably don't understand.
I know. I feel like for the first time ever, I'm like, you and I are old. Like I don't know when that happened, but it happened at some point.
So, all right, well, we're going to meet up in our digital museums one day and look at all of our digital art while we have our Oculuses on and there's real art on the walls, and we'll have the cognitive dissonance of going back and forth between the two.
Yeah, I can't wait for that.
Awesome, Scott. Listen, where can we send people to find you on the internet or find out more about Masterworks?
Yeah, www.masterworks.io. Just click request access. Mention that they saw us on your show, and we'll help them skip the wait list and create an account.
Awesome, man. Well, listen, thank you so much. We will. We've done it once before. We will definitely do it again. So just keep it up, and I'm a big fan. And best of luck.
Thanks. Good to see you.